They called her the Silent Queen Girl, not because she was shy, not because she was gentle, but because the entire empire had learned to fear what happened when she made a sound. In the violet court of Aurelius, silence was not empty. Silence was a weapon. Silence was an oath. Silence was the thin wall that kept ancient grief from tearing the palace apart. And she, Princess Valera of the pale lavender bloodline, carried that wall inside her chest, day after day, year after year. She sat on her living throne of braided crystal and dark wood, and she never spoke. Courtiers bowed, generals saluted, envoys rehearsed perfect speeches. And none of them heard her voice, not once. They still judged her though. They judged her eyes. The way those dark, expressive eyes looked through people, like they were smoke. They judged her mouth, the small mouth that never opened in public. They judged her calm, and called it arrogance. They judged her stillness, and called it cruelty. Some whispered she could not speak. Others whispered she chose not to. And the oldest servants, the ones who had seen the palace before it became polished and ceremonial, whispered a third thing. They said the last time she cried out, the walls themselves answered. That was why. The banquet mattered. That was why every lantern was lit. Every crystalline orb floated in careful patterns of blue, pink, and purple. Every gold-rimmed plate was aligned as if the universe would collapse if one knife sat crooked. That was why. The hall was dressed like a forest pretending to be a palace, with massive twisting pillars shaped like tree trunks reaching toward the arched ceiling. That was why warm sunlight poured through the tall windows like honey, as if light itself had been invited to witness history. Because tonight, the Empire was hosting humans from the starward border, humans with blunt tongues and strange laughter, humans who did not understand sacred silence, humans who had fought like storms in the last skirmish, and then offered medicine to the wounded enemy afterward. Humans who could be terrifying and kind in the same breath. The Council of Aurelius wanted an alliance. They wanted human shipyards, human navigators, human stubborn courage. The humans wanted passage through the Nebula Gate, and access to Aurelius crystal engines that could bend light and distance. The treaty would reshape a sector of space, maybe save worlds, maybe doom them, depending on who you asked. And there was one problem no diplomat wanted to say out loud. The treaty required the royal seal. The royal seal required the royal heir. And the royal heir, the Silent Queen Girl, had never spoken a vow in public. They had tried everything before inviting the humans. They had brought singers whose voices could shiver glass. They had brought philosophers who could make crowds cry with a single sentence. They had brought priests with incense and rituals and soft chanting. They had brought doctors with gentle lights and complicated scans. They had brought jesters once long ago. The jesters did not return. So the court prepared for failure, dressed it in gold, and hoped no one would notice. They practiced smiles that did not reach the eyes. They practiced polite laughter that sounded like small, controlled coughs. They practiced speeches about mutual respect, and privately prayed the humans would not take offense. Then the humans arrived, and with them came a man who looked like he had stepped into the wrong story. His name was Elias Marr. He was in his late 30s, with short dark hair and a clean-shaven face, olive skin warmed by travel and sun. He wore a formal charcoal suit jacket over a light shirt, as if someone had told him to look serious, and he had obeyed in the laziest way possible. His eyes were the kind that noticed everything, and forgave almost nothing. Yet when he smiled, it did something reckless to the atmosphere, like opening a window in a sealed room. The Aurelius guards watched him the way they watched unknown animals. The court watchers noted how easily he walked among the floating lanterns, unbothered by their sacred patterns. The diplomats from both sides whispered his file name to each other with irritation. Human Cultural Liaison, a title that sounded harmless, until you learned humans used humor like a blade. When Elias entered the banquet hall, he paused at the threshold. He did not immediately step forward like a man hungry for attention. He simply stood and looked at the high fantasy architecture of nature and crystal, the twisting wooden pillars, the sunlight like gold, The long table set with white, plates rimmed in gold, and the delicate stemmed glasses that caught warm light and turned it into sparkle. Then he let out a low breath that sounded almost reverent, and he said softly, as if talking to himself, "This place looks like a forest learned diplomacy and decided to show off." The nearest Aurelus attendant blinked like she was not sure whether to be insulted or flattered. Elias turned, caught her expression, and smiled gently. "Flattered," he said. "Please. I mean flattered." That small moment spread like ripples. A guard relaxed his grip. A tense diplomat exhaled. A human officer smirked, and somewhere above, a glowing orb drifted half a finger width out of alignment. Like even the lanterns leaned in to listen. The silent queen girl arrived last. The room felt her before people saw her. The sound did not change, but the attention did, as if the hall itself remembered an old rule. When she enters, breathe carefully. Valera walked with measured grace. Her pale lavender skin caught the warm sunlight and turned it soft. Subtle ridges and patterns along her elongated rounded head glimmered like hidden geometry. Her garment was an elaborate high-collared piece of dark blue and purple, threaded with glowing geometric lines of neon turquoise and magenta. More magical than technological, more ceremonial than fashionable. She looked like a night sky wearing armor. Her eyes were large and dark, reflective like deep water. She did not smile, she did not frown, she did not show anger. She simply took her seat near the foreground, at the treaty position, and beside her, to the right. The court placed Elias Mar, because sometimes politics was cruelly simple. The humans wanted access, the Aurelus wanted proof. So they sat the human who made people breathe easier next to the alien girl who made people forget how to breathe. At all, when Elias sat, he did not immediately speak to her. He did not force a greeting. He did not throw words at her like stones. He adjusted his chair, laid his hands neatly by his plate, and waited. He waited long enough that the silence started to become a question. Then he leaned slightly, not toward her face, but toward the space between them, respectful as a man approaching a sacred fire. "Princess," he said quietly, "I was told you prefer silence." He paused, then added, "I respect that." Another pause. "But if you ever decide to break it, you will not owe anyone an explanation from me." Valera's eyes moved to him, not a glance, not a polite diplomatic look, a direct focus, like a lens locking on a target. For the first time that evening, Elias felt the pressure of her presence. It was not hatred. It was not curiosity. It was something colder and older. A cautious measuring of whether he was safe. Elias met her gaze and did not flinch then. Because he was either brave or foolish, he gave a small shrug. "I tend to be unsafe for boring conversations," he murmured, "but I am very safe for honesty." The dinner began. Courses arrived like art. Arranged purple and blue flowers along the table, delicate food shaped like spirals and jewels, glasses filled with pale gold liquid. Speeches followed. The usual dance of gratitude and history. The humans spoke about shared roots and mutual defense. The Aurelus spoke about sacred gates and balanced power. Everyone clapped at the correct times, smiled at the correct times, laughed small controlled laughs at the correct times, all while stealing glances toward Valera, waiting to see if she would do anything at all. She did not. She ate slowly, precisely, barely lifting her gaze. At times her eyes drifted toward the window light, as if she was more interested in the dust motes floating in sun than the treaty that could change the sector. The court began to tighten again. They could feel the failure approaching. Elias noticed. He noticed the way human officers shifted when the room grew stiff. He noticed the way Aurelus courtiers tucked their hands into sleeves like nervous birds. He noticed the way Valera's shoulders held a tension that did not look like boredom, but like restraint. So he did the one thing every warning file about Aurelus royalty said never to do. He tried to make the silent queen girl laugh, not loudly, not at first. He began with something small, almost invisible. He leaned toward his own plate, inspected a perfectly arranged spiral of food, and whispered, as if confiding a secret, I am going to be honest with you, I think this is delicious. But it also looks like the kind of thing that would judge me for chewing incorrectly. A human officer 2 seats away choked slightly into his drink. An Auralist attendant froze, scandalized by the casual disrespect towards ceremonial cuisine. Valera did nothing, but Elias saw it. The tiniest change at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, not even close. Just a microscopic hesitation. As if a part of her tried to remember what amusement felt like, and failed. Elias did not press, he simply continued eating. Calm minutes passed. The speeches shifted to toasts. The council regent, Lord Severin, rose with a practiced smile, his voice as smooth as polished stone. He praised the humans for their strength. He praised Auralis for its wisdom. He praised Valera without looking directly at her, because he feared the idea of her attention, and finally he lifted his glass and said the line everyone dreaded. May our silent queen bless this treaty with her vow. The hall held its breath so hard the lantern seemed to stop glowing. Valera's hands rested near her plate. Still, her eyes stared forward, deep and unreadable. No vow came, no sound came. The regent's smile started to crack. Elias felt something in his chest tighten. Not because the treaty mattered to him, though it did, but because he saw Valera's expression. He saw the shame hidden behind her stillness, the anger hidden behind her restraint, the loneliness hidden behind her title. She was not refusing to speak to punish them. She was refusing because she believed her voice would destroy something. Elias made a decision that would have gotten a human diplomat fired and an Auralist courtier executed. He broke protocol. He turned slightly toward her and spoke as if no one else existed. Valera, he said softly, they are asking you to bless a treaty. I do not know your laws, and I will not pretend I do. But I know what it feels like to carry a fear that everyone mistakes for coldness. He paused, letting his words land gently. If you do not speak because you do not want to, that is your right. If you do not speak because you are afraid, then you deserve someone who can sit beside you without demanding you bleed for their comfort. The regent's eyes sharpened, courtiers murmured, guards tensed, humans stiffened, ready for insult or incident. Valera's gaze slid to Elias again. This time it was different. It was not measuring, it was searching. Elias felt the weight of that look and almost regretted everything. Almost. Then he remembered his own sister, years ago. After a disaster on a border colony, he remembered her sitting in silence for weeks, flinching at voices, refusing to speak because speech felt like stepping back into fire. He remembered how one day she had laughed suddenly at something stupid and small, and how that laugh had sounded like survival. So Elias did something even more dangerous. He told the truth in a room built on ceremony. He said, quietly, my sister stopped speaking once. It was not because she was weak. It was because she was trying to stay alive. He swallowed the emotion. Sharp but controlled. The first time she laughed again, it was ugly and loud and surprised. It scared us all, and then it saved her. Valera's fingers moved, just slightly, against the edge of her plate. A nervous motion. A human motion. Elias noticed and kept his voice gentle. Princess, he said, they call you silent like it is your nature. But I think it is your burden. If you ever want to set it down, even for one breath, I will not step away for a moment. The world narrowed to the space between them. Warm sunlight, floating orbs, polished table, careful flowers, and a girl who had been turned into a symbol, being spoken to like a person. Valera's lips parted. The room nearly shattered with hope and fear. Then she closed them again. Her eyes flicked down. And Elias understood. She wanted to, but something inside her held the silence like a locked door. The regent recovered quickly, lifting his glass higher, forcing the ceremony forward. Of course, he said brightly. The princess blesses with her presence. Let the treaty proceed. Let us celebrate the beginning of a new era. Applause erupted. Too eager, too desperate. Human diplomats clapped politely. Auralist courtiers clapped like they were sealing a crack. In a dam with their hands, Valera remained still, Elias clapped once, twice, then stopped. He looked at her and felt a quiet fury at the cruelty of everyone cheering around a girl who was silently drowning. As the dinner continued, a subtle shift moved through the hall. The glowing orbs floated a little lower. The musicians played a little faster. The laughter of courtiers became a little louder, not joy, distraction. A room trying to pretend it was not disappointed. Elias leaned back slightly and let his eyes travel. He had been on enough ships and in enough border towns to recognize danger. That wore perfume. He noticed an auraless attendant carrying a silver tray, moving too smoothly, too directly, toward the treaty table. He noticed the attendant's sleeves, slightly longer than regulation. He noticed the way the regent's guard captain looked away at the wrong moment, and he felt the hair on his arms rise. Valera's eyes snapped to the same attendant, faster. Then Elias, sharper than him. Her stillness did not change, but her focus did. It was like watching a storm gather without wind. Elias understood in a cold flash. The silent queen girl was not a fragile ornament. She was aware. She was trapped, but aware. The attendant stepped closer. The tray tilted slightly under the edge of the tray. Something thin and bright caught the sunlight. A blade, not for the humans, for Valera. Elias moved without thinking. He stood too fast. His chair scraping, drawing eyes, in a room where every movement was choreographed. His sudden clumsy shift was an alarm bell. The attendant froze, then lunged. Elias grabbed the tray, yanked it sideways, and the blade flashed out into open air. Gasps erupted. Auraless guards surged forward. Humans stood, hands moving toward concealed sidearms they had promised not to bring, and of course had brought anyway. The assassin's eyes locked on Valera with hate. The blade drove forward. Elias did the only thing he could. He put himself between the blade and the girl who had never spoken. The blade struck his shoulder, hot and sharp. Pain exploded. But Elias held the assassin's wrist and slammed it down against the table edge. Glass shattered, flowers fell, golden liquid splashed. The hall erupted into chaos. Guards tackled the assassin. The regent shouted orders. Humans yelled. Auraless attendants screamed. Lanterns bobbed. Sunlight still poured in as if the universe refused to panic through the chaos. Elias turned his head toward Valera. He expected to see fear. He expected to see coldness. Instead he saw something he had not seen in her all night. Horror, not horror at the blade, horror at him bleeding for her. Valera's hands lifted. They hovered, uncertain, like she did not remember she was allowed to move. Her mouth opened. This time it was not a ceremonial attempt. It was an instinct, a reflex, a human thing, as if she wanted to shout for help. No sound came, but her throat tightened, and her eyes glistened. Elias, swaying, smiled at her anyway. "Stubborn," he said, with breath pulled tight through pain. "I told you, I do not step away." Guards dragged the assassin out. The regent tried to restore order with furious dignity. The humans demanded explanations. The Auralist promised investigations. The banquet was broken. The long table a mess of fallen flowers and shattered glass. But Elias did not care about any of it. His shoulder burned, his arm trembled, and he kept his eyes on Valera, because she looked like she was about to fall apart in perfect silence. They moved him to a side chamber, a quieter room where the pillars still looked like tree trunks, but the light was softer. Auralist medical attendants arrived with glowing tools. Human officers argued in low voices. The regent's guards watched. Elias like he might be the real threat. Elias sat on a bench and tried not to show how badly he shook. Then the door opened, and Valera entered, alone. The attendants stiffened. The humans fell silent. Even the medical lights seemed to dim. Valera walked to Elias with the same measured grace, but now it looked strained, as if every step cost her something. She stopped in front of him, her eyes fixed on the wound, on the blood. Elias tried to make a joke and failed. He gave a small tired smile and said, "I have had worse." He paused, then added honestly, "Not many, but some." Valera lifted her hand. Slowly, asking without words. Elias nodded. She touched his sleeve near the cut fabric, her fingers cool, careful. The moment her fingers brushed him, Elias felt a strange sensation, like a faint vibration in his bones. He frowned, not in fear, but in curiosity. Valera withdrew her hand, and her eyes searched his face again, deeper than before. Then she looked down, and something inside her seemed to fold, like a person finally admitting exhaustion. Elias spoke gently, because he sensed this was the kind of moment that could be ruined by a careless word. That assassin was not your fault, he said. Valera's shoulders tightened. Elias continued, softer. Someone has tried to turn you into a symbol for too long. They are using your silence, using your fear. He leaned forward a little, careful. I do not know what happened to you, but I know what it feels like to be blamed for surviving. Valera's lips trembled. A sound tried to climb out of her chest. It caught. She shut her eyes. Her forehead lowered just slightly, like a bow made of grief. Elias felt his throat tighten. He whispered, "You do not have to speak to be heard. But you deserve to be able to." Valera opened her eyes, for the first time. They were not cold, they were raw. She gestured, small motions, awkward, as if she had not used her hands this way in years. She pointed to her throat, then to the air, then made a motion like a door closing. Elias understood enough to guess. "Something stops you," he said quietly. "Something closes the door." Valera nodded once, sharply, like the truth hurt. Elias swallowed, then asked the question the whole empire was too afraid to ask. Is it a curse? Is it a choice? Or is it someone else holding the key? Valera's eyes flashed. She turned her gaze toward the palace halls beyond the door, toward the direction of the regent's chambers, and in that look, Elias saw the answer. Someone else held the key. Elias leaned back slowly, anger simmering beneath his calm. He spoke carefully. "Because treason was a word that could get people killed in a palace like this. Someone has been keeping you silent," he murmured. Valera's fingers curled against her own palm, a restrained fury. Elias nodded, then said, "I am sorry." Valera blinked. Confused, Elias tried again, more human, more direct. "I'm sorry they made you carry this alone." Her mouth opened again. This time, a sound escaped. Not a word, not even close. A tiny breathy noise, like the ghost of a laugh that had forgotten its own shape. Elias froze, eyes widening. Valera's eyes widened too, like she could not believe what she had done. Elias smiled slowly, with wonder. He whispered, "There you are." Valera stared at him, then looked away as if ashamed. Elias lifted his uninjured hand, palm up, offering without pressure. "May I tell you something stupid?" he asked. Valera hesitated, then nodded barely. Elias took a breath, and let himself become the version of him that existed before war and politics. "When I was a kid," he said, "my mother had a rule. If the house was too tense, you had to do something ridiculous on purpose, not to mock anyone, to remind your body it was allowed to live." He glanced at her, and his eyes softened. She used to balance a spoon on her nose and walk around like she was a royal bird. "I tried it once, and the spoon fell into soup. And my father laughed so hard he cried." Elias paused, then admitted, "I miss that sound." Valera watched him with an expression that was almost painful, like she recognized missing as a language. Elias took another breath, and before he could overthink it, he did it. He picked up a small polished fruit from the tray beside him, something round and golden. He carefully balanced it on the tip of his nose. The medical attendant stared in disbelief. The guard at the door looked like he was about to faint. Elias crossed his eyes slightly, trying to keep the fruit steady. Valera's eyes widened. A small shock of surprise moved through her, visible, undeniable. Elias held perfectly still, then spoke through the strain, trying to sound regal and serious. "I am the supreme ambassador of fruit," he said, "and I demand safe passage through your terrifying palace." For a heartbeat, Valera looked like she might remain stone. Then something inside her broke loose. Not violence, not power, not doom. A bright, involuntary burst of laughter. It was soft at first, like a startled breath. Then it rose and rose, a clear ringing sound that did not belong to the court's controlled world. A laugh that was surprised by itself. A laugh that shook. Sunlight into the room. The fruit fell off Elias's nose and rolled away. Elias laughed too, relieved and stunned. The attendants stood frozen. The guards stared, as if they had just witnessed a star being born. Valera clapped a hand to her mouth, eyes wide with fear, as if laughter was forbidden, as if she had just confessed a crime. Elias immediately sobered. He lowered his voice. "Hey," he whispered, "you are safe." Valera's chest rose and fell, her eyes darting toward the door. Elias turned his head slightly and saw the faint shimmer in the air near the doorway. A hidden field, a listening veil. The palace had been watching her even here, monitoring her, containing her. Elias's jaw tightened, and he felt a surge of controlled rage. He looked back at Valera and spoke with fierce gentleness. "Your laughter just proved something," he said. "Someone told you that sound equals danger, but your sound is not danger. Their control is." Valera's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She stood taller, trembling. And for the first time, Elias saw not just a wounded girl, but a queen being held hostage by her own court. Elias rose despite the pain. He said quietly, "They will try to hide what you just did. They will try to make you believe it never happened. Do you want to fight them?" Valera stared at him, her mouth opened. She could not form words, but she lifted her chin and nodded once. A royal decision. Yes, they returned to the banquet hall. Not to celebrate, to confront. The long table had been partially restored, but the atmosphere was cracked. Whispers filled the air like smoke. The regent sat with a rigid smile, eyes sharp, already calculating how to spin the assassination. How to keep the humans from demanding blood. How to keep Valera silent. When Elias walked in with Valera beside him, the room faltered, because Valera was not gliding like an ornament anymore. She was standing like someone who had remembered she owned the ground. Elias stepped forward, ignoring protocol, ignoring the burn in his shoulder. He spoke clearly so every ear could hear. "There was an assassination attempt on your royal heir," he said. "That is not a small incident. That is not a banquet inconvenience. That is an act of war inside your own palace." He paused, letting the words cut through silken ceremony. The regent lifted a hand, smiling too smoothly. "Ambassador Mar," he began. Elias lifted his own hand, polite but unyielding. "No," he said. Then louder, "For the hall, nitrogen monoxide." He turned slightly toward the humans, and then back toward the Auralist Council. "We came to build peace," he said. "We will not sign a treaty in a palace where the air is treated like a locked vault," and nearly stabbed at the dinner table. He drew a slow breath, and his next words landed like a hammer. "And we will not pretend her silence is sacred if it is forced." A shockwave moved through the hall. Guards tensed, courtiers gasped. Some looked furious, others looked terrified. The regent's eyes narrowed. Valera stepped forward. Her glowing garment caught the light, turquoise and magenta lines like living truth. She lifted her hand, a delicate gesture, but commanding. The hall fell silent again, not fearful this time, attentive. Valera pointed to her throat, then she pointed at the regent, then she opened her mouth and forced a sound. It was not a word, it was a vowel, raw and shaking, but it echoed. It echoed because the palace itself responded. The twisting wooden pillars trembled like trees in wind. The floating lanterns flared brighter. Crystalline orbs pulsed in color. The air vibrated. Courtiers cried out, not in pain, in awe and fear. The oldest servants dropped to their knees, whispering prayers, because the old whisper had been true. Her voice and the palace were linked. Elias felt it in his bones again, that vibration. He realized then what Valera was, not a fragile princess. A living key, a resonance binder, a royal bloodline designed to bond with the palace's crystal core, to protect it, to awaken it, to lock it down. And someone in this core had been terrified of that, so they had silenced her. They had convinced the Empire that her voice was dangerous, when in truth, her voice was power. The regent stood slowly, his mask slipping. "Princess," he said, "you are overwhelmed. We can discuss this privately." Valera shook her head, trembling. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed again, a short, sharp laugh, defiant. The hall flinched. The lanterns flashed, and the regent's face went pale. Elias understood the final piece. Her laughter was not just emotion, it was unfiltered resonance. It disrupted whatever control field they had woven around her. Elias spoke loud enough to cut through panic. "Everyone stay where you are," he said, then, louder, "Stay." The humans obeyed, trained for chaos. Many Aurelists froze, caught between fear and obedience. The regent's guard captain shifted, hand moving to a hidden switch on his belt. Valera saw it. She turned her head, locked eyes with the guard captain. And she made a sound again, not loud, not cruel. A single sustained note, trembling but steady. The guard captain's belt device sparked, then died. The listening veil near the doors shattered like invisible glass. The hall gasped as if air returned. After years without it, Elias looked at Valera with something close to reverence. He did not worship her. He recognized her. A person who had been caged because her truth was inconvenient. The regent's voice sharpened. "This is treason," he hissed. Elias stepped forward, eyes hard. "No," he said. "This is liberation." Valera lifted her hand again. Then she did something no one expected. She turned to Elias, and in front of the entire court, she reached out and took his hand, a simple human gesture. In the violet court, it was an earthquake. Elias felt her fingers tremble, felt her grip tighten as if she was anchoring herself to something real. He squeezed back, careful, steady. He leaned toward her and whispered, "You already did the hardest part." Valera drew a breath. Her throat worked, fighting the lock inside. Her eyes glistened, but she held her chin high. Then she forced out a word, broken but clear enough to be understood. "Human." The hall erupted into stunned whispers. Elias blinked hard, emotion hitting like a wave. He whispered back, "Yes, I am Valera." Swallowed and tried again. Her voice cracked, but it came. Elias. At the sound of his name and her voice, something in the palace answered again. The pillars hummed, the lanterns glowed warmer, the crystalline orbs drifted into new patterns, like the room itself was rearranging around truth. Elias felt tears, threatened, and he refused to let them fall yet. He smiled at her, and his voice trembled just a little. "Hello, Valera." The regent backed away half a step, seeing the palace respond to her, seeing control slip, seeing the humans watching, seeing his own court beginning to realize they had been lied to for years. Valera turned toward the hall. Her face still carried fear, but now it carried something else too, a fierce young dignity. She opened her mouth, and the words came slowly, like a gate opening for the first time. She began. Then she paused, breath shaking. The room waited. Elias stood beside her, not pushing, just present. Valera continued, her voice growing steadier with each sound. "I was silent because you made me afraid." A sharp intake of breath swept the court. Valera's eyes burned as she spoke. "You told me my voice would break you, but your lies broke me instead." She swallowed, and then, unexpectedly, her mouth lifted into a small smile, and a laugh flickered. Again, soft, alive, she looked at Elias, then back to the hall. "One human made me laugh in public, and I remembered I am not your prisoner." The hall held that sentence like fire. Some courtiers cried, quietly, some looked furious. Some looked ashamed, the regent looked cornered. Elias stepped forward and addressed both sides, steady and clear. "The treaty can still happen," he said, "but it will happen with transparency. It will happen with the air free, and it will happen with consequences for anyone who tried to silence her." Valera lifted her hand and made the smallest motion, like a queen granting permission. Elias turned his head toward her, surprised. She nodded and whispered, "More," a single word, but it landed in Elias's chest like a promise. She wanted her voice back. Fully, she wanted to keep going. Elias smiled, then did something he knew would make history laugh or scream. He looked at the stunned hall and said, very calmly also, I want the record to show that my supreme ambassadorship of fruit was never properly recognized. A startled sound escaped someone, maybe a human, maybe an Aurelus attendant. Then another, then, impossibly. Valera laughed again, clearer this time, brighter. And when the silent queen girl laughed, the palace lights warmed, as if the building itself approved. That laugh shattered the last of the old fear. People stared at her not like a curse, but like a person, a young queen who had been wounded and still chose joy as defiance. The regent tried to speak, but his voice sounded weak now, because in a hall full of alien and human guests, the moment had turned. The humans were not impressed by silence, they were impressed by courage. The Aurelis were not comforted by tradition, they were awakened by truth. Later, long after the guards escorted the regent away under investigation, long after the treaty was rewritten under honest eyes, long after the banquet hall was repaired and reset, Valera stood alone by the tall windows where warm sunlight poured in. Elias approached quietly, his shoulder bandaged, his suit ruined, his expression soft. She did not flinch this time. She turned to him and spoke slowly, carefully, like someone learning to walk again. Why, she asked. Why did you stand in front of the blade? Elias looked down, then back up. Because you looked like someone who had been surviving in a room full of people for too long, he said. Because I know that kind of loneliness. Because if a palace needs a girl to be silent to feel safe, then the palace is the problem, not the girl. Valera blinked, and tears finally slipped free, silent. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. Elias shook his head gently. Do not apologize for being human about it, he said. Valera's mouth trembled. Then she smiled, small and sincere. I am not human, she said, voice still delicate but real. Elias smiled back, warm, I know. Then he added, you are better, because you fought your way back to laughter. Valera looked out at the sunlight, then back to him. Public, she said. Tasting the word, Elias nodded. Yes. Valera's eyes softened, and she whispered, again. Elias raised his brows, playful. You want me to risk international incident again? Valera's smile widened. A new thing. A dangerous thing for an empire built on fear. She nodded, then laughed quietly. And the palace lanterns shimmered like they were laughing too. In that moment, the silent queen girl was silent no longer. Not because she had become loud, but because she had become free. And across the long, ornately set table of a once broken banquet hall, humans and aliens finally understood the same simple truth. A treaty could be signed with ink and seals, but trust, real trust, began when one stubborn human chose kindness over caution, and one wounded queen chose laughter over fear.